Hello, I am the narrator and I'm going to tell you about the potato famine and the Irish immigrants going to the U.S. Why? Because I can. Life for the Irish in the 19th century wasn't so great. Before the potato famine even happened, Ireland was a country of extreme poverty. There were horrible housing conditions. Some people were forced to live in mud cabins with no windows. People married young and with no possessions. But what caused this poverty, you might be asking? Basically, the problem was too many people and too little land. Most of the land was owned by English people. They broke large farms down into small farms that they would then rent to Irish people. This way they could make more money by collecting more rents. These similar farms didn't need hired help, so all the Irish who made their living behind hired on farms were out of work. The result was a lot of unemployment. I have no job! So now you may be asking, how did the Irish even feed themselves? And the answer is, potatoes. And that's why one of the Irish stereotypes is potatoes. The reason that the Irish were eating all these potatoes was because the potato could be grown very easily on small farms. Potatoes were easy to grow, cheap, hardy, and would feed people and livestock. Before the potato famine, an average working adult consumed 11 to 14 pounds of potato a day. But then something really bad happened. The Irish potato famine, also known as the Great Hunger, was making its way across Ireland and all of Europe. The Ireland was hit pretty hard because of how much they relied on potatoes. The blight started in the summer of 1845 and was caused by a fungus-like organism called Pitha fungus thing. Scientists and farmers were unable to find a cure, so half of the crops of 1845 were lost. By the spring of 1846, panic set in as food supplies dwindled. People were getting sick from eating rotten potatoes. In 1846, all the crops were wiped out. In 1847, crops were very successful, but there were not enough seeds, so the famine continued. The potato famine made people leave the country for the United States and Canada.
Bye guys, I'm going to the USA.
And now I'm going to talk to you about the effects of the famine. The potato famine killed more than 1 million people in 5 years. Basically, it was so bad that some people resorted to eating grass like cows. The starving people then got diseases and infections because when you are starving, you are more likely to get sick like that because your immune system is down. The population of Ireland was half, but I'm not saying that half of the population died. No. What I'm saying is that 1 million people died, and then there were 2 million people who decided to emigrate because of the famine. Researchers believe that 1/4 of the Irish population ended up in the United States. A lot of people who left had just enough money to get on the ships, but that they didn't have any money for when they got there or to buy food on the ship. British were jerks to the Irish back then. Ireland was pretty much made a colony of Britain in 1801 with the Acts of Union. Ireland was not well represented in the Parliament at that time. Representatives of Ireland to Parliament were actually English people who owned land in Ireland. During the famine, the British didn't give Ireland food or aid. The British didn't give the Irish proper care because they were relying too much on laissez-faire capitalism.
Laissez-faire. Quiet, you.
Laissez-faire is a French term for do not interfere. The British lawmakers were using this as an excuse for not giving food and aid to Irish people. Another reason that the British landowners were jerks was because they found a way to make money while the Irish people were starving. Large farms in Ireland were actually owned by English people who were growing oats and grains and exporting these crops for money. The Irish couldn't make money or feed themselves this way because they couldn't afford big plots of land, and that that you need to grow these types of crops. Food was leaving the country, and the Irish weren't getting any of it. Researchers now believe that if the Irish government had banned Ireland from exporting crops and kept the crops in Ireland, not as many people would have died. In addition, during this time, some of the British people thought that the potato famine was the judgment of God. These people saw the famine as the divine solution to the Irish overpopulation. Now let's talk about more bad things that happened to the Irish immigrants. The conditions of the passage to other countries were terrible. The ships were crowded, had poor sanitation, and most everybody on board was sick and starving. The Irish left their country with just basically the clothes on their backs. The places the Irish were going were Australia, America, Britain, and Canada. Most of the immigrants went to the United States. Some of the transport ships were old slave ships. The passengers were treated more like cargo than people on these ships. The Irish people on the ships that came straight to the U.S. were in better shape when they got to the U.S. Because there were better living conditions on these ships, some Irish people took ships to Canada because passage was cheaper, but the living conditions were worse. 30% of immigrants to Canada died on the passage or in quarantine. Once they got to Canada, some Irish people wanted to continue on to America. These people took Canadian timber ships from Canada to the U.S. These timber ships were not really good to travel in because they were made to carry lumber and not people. The living conditions were absolutely terrible. The nickname for these timber ships was coffin ships. And you know what was a little better than life on the coffin ships? Life in the U.S. Most Irish people who arrived here were poor and illiterate, and there was a language barrier. The Irish immigrants didn't understand American-style English because they only spoke an Irish dialect.
I have no idea what anyone is saying.
They didn't have any appropriate job skills. They were only potato farmers who didn't have the right kind of skills for working on the big American farms of the Midwest. As a result, the Irish ended up settling in big cities like Boston and New York. Life was not easy for them in the cities. The only jobs that they could get were the most lowest paying. These jobs were dangerous and tiring. The men worked jobs like dock workers and street cleaners. Both men and women found jobs in sweatshops. Women could find jobs as servants, and the children were beggars. The Irish tended to stay together in Irish ghettos. They lived in tenement slums that had no water, sanitation, or daylight.
It smells in here.
The immigrants were not liked because they made the cities more crowded. Boston's population increased by 30%. Another reason the immigrants were not liked was because people feared that they would take their jobs, because the Irish immigrants were willing to work for less money. You know, the people of the U.S. were also jerks, so let's talk about that. The U.S. was mostly Protestant religion, while the Irish were mostly Catholic. Religious prejudice was another reason that the Irish were not liked.
I like Catholics.
Some people in the U.S. were afraid that the Irish would blindly follow the Pope. The Pope is the leader of the Catholic Church who lives in Rome. Signs started appearing in job ads. No Irish need apply because of growing resentment towards the Irish Catholics. The U.S. people were afraid that the Irish immigrants were going to help the Pope take over the government and country.
I want the Pope to take over.
Secret societies began to form around the idea that the Irish need to go back to Ireland. One of these societies was created in New York. It was called the Star-Spangled Banner Society. A political party that had the same ideas was also formed. It was called the American Party, but it was nicknamed the Know Nothing Party. It was nicknamed the Know Nothing Party because when members were questioned about their politics, they said they knew nothing.
I know nothing.
This political party was based on religious disintegration because they believed that the Catholicism of the Irish immigrants was incompatible with American life. they became a pretty powerful political party who was able to elect governors, mayors, and congressmen. Between 1854 and 1855, there were riots and violence against Irish immigrants. The Know Nothing Party was behind these acts of violence. The Know Nothing Party was behind these acts of violence. They put the idea in people's head that the Irish were bad. During these riots, homes and churches were ransacked and destroyed. Between 20 and 100 people died in riots in Louisville. In 1855, the people responding never went to jail or got in trouble.
What?
So after all these bad things that happened to the Irish immigrants, they were finally able to assimilate into American society. The thing that changed everything for the Irish immigrants was the Civil War. People were distracted by the Civil War, and the question of slavery was not as concerned about the Irish immigration. During the Civil War, the Know Nothing Party began to lose power, and there was less hate towards the Irish. The Irish immigrants helped America during the Civil War by fighting as soldiers. On the side of the Union, they came back from the war as heroes. So all this led to more acceptance. Another thing that led to the Irish being more accepted was that America found new immigrants to be prejudiced against. Yay! These immigrants were from China and Southern and Eastern Europe and arrived in the U.S. in 1880s and 1890s. After the Civil War, the Irish were able to find jobs that were better paying. The Irish people were able to find jobs in factories, mines, and railroads. Because of the industrialization, these new industrial jobs led to the formation of unions. This led to the Irish getting involved in the union politics, and then eventually city, state, and national politics. Now that the Irish had more money, they were able to become part of the middle class. They had more money, so now they could send their kids to college. So the next generation of Irish Americans were able to become doctors, lawyers, judges, and teachers. Big proof that Irish were assimilating was that an Irish American named John F. Kennedy was elected President of the United States in 1960. JFK was the great-grandson of Irish immigrants. At first, the Irish immigrants were seen as a disease, but they were eventually seen as loyal and helpful. The Irish actually ended up strengthening this country. And that's it.